السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم واجعلنا منهم آمين. Alhamdulillah that we are back for this very important session that touches the lives of us, Muslims and non-Muslims in this country and people around the world. You will notice some changes. Not that myself and Hajj Hassan have changed, but there are some guidelines that the Shura had came up with for talks and khutab. So we'll try, inshallah, to adhere to it in this regard. Should be available for the public, inshallah. The topic is the new landscape in America. And what has been happening in the past 100 days is beyond what many people, if not the majority or the bulk of the American people, have ever dreamed that this thing will take place. To millions of people in this country, it's a nightmare. And to people overseas, it's full of uncertainty of what this can bring. Let me give you a few examples. So you have this person who the government sent him an appointment to come and get the green card. He goes to the appointment and the government is waiting for him. They arrest him and they take him away. Another one got a letter that there's an appointment for citizenship. Come for the test. Goes for the test. Government is waiting for him, arrest him and take him away. People who have been here for some time and they have papers, suddenly they are being deported. Even the government admits that some of them were deported by mistake, but they said we are not going to bring them back. Universities are telling the students, don't leave this country. Don't leave this country. Advice is being given to people, if you have a green card, don't leave this country. You do not know if you will be allowed to come back. There are 1,500 students at least who got their visa revoked. Then the government changed its stories, but it's totally uncertainty. Hundreds of thousands of people have been deported from this country. The president was caught on a high mic telling the president of El Salvador that I'm gonna also send you American citizens. And there were some talk and denial, but later on it was made clear, yeah, it's on the agenda. And they're looking into the legality of it. So there are so many things that are taking place at this point. I gave only symptoms. What is the real issue? We will discuss, inshallah. I'm going to give some highlights. Hajj Hassan will talk about the economic impact in this country and overseas. But there are certain features that are clear. First, those changes will affect almost every aspect of the American life. It would affect education. It would affect travel. It will affect citizenship. It will affect jobs. I mean, you name it. In a nutshell, it's a cultural war between the old political establishment of Obama, Biden, Hillary Clinton, and the new political establishment, الوسط السياسي الجديد, they have been taking so many issues one after the other that whoever is trying to pay attention and try to address it through the courts, they have been off balance. As many of you remember, it started from early on when the president signed that only the government recognize two genders, males and females. That's it. And then this DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, will be gone. Telling universities, telling government department, telling other private companies that from now on, this thing is not in the requirement. Because during the time of the Biden administration, to apply for a grant and to do something in this regard, you have to have this DEI. Even we have seen Facebook doing away with this and even closing a school that they have with free tuition to try and you know, they have been bragging that this will address this issue. But during those first few days, there were some subjects that took people off balance here and overseas. One, Canada needs to be the 51st state of this country. Second, we're gonna buy Greenland. Third, we're gonna own Gaza and get the people out of Gaza. Fifth, Panama Canal is the US canal, and we need to reclaim it. The Gulf of Mexico from now on is called the Gulf of America. When the Associated Press dared to call it the Gulf of Mexico, they were prevented from entering the press room in the White House. So initially, you know, the hoopla around all of this got people think, okay, what's all this thing about? And then the real issues that have to do, as I said, with the cultural war in this country and the direction of this country start coming one after the other. And suddenly shifted to the tariffs, which affected, of course, international commerce. It affected that Dr. Hassan will talk about. Stock market in a few days lost $9 trillion. Of course, money on papers, those stocks. $9 trillion. When there was, you know, an uproar where this thing is heading, the president came and said, oh, I'm going to make exception of this and that for the computers, iPhone, and then cars. And he started this thing with China. You know, you increase, I'll increase. Now with China, the tariffs is like 245%. And then the Chinese says, no, 125, we are not going to add to it because it just became like, you know, a kid's game. To the point that this past 2 days, China made a statement, anyone who tells you that China and the US are engaging in trade talk is lying. Is lying. Basically, you know, the government said, we are talking to China. China said, no, there's no such talk. We are not talking in this regard. People have seen leaders brought to the White House being paraded in front of the media. And people have seen in the American press that the president have asked the staff of the White House to kick out the president of Ukraine, because he dared to stand his ground on some of the issues. Now with the executive orders, they have been coming on a daily basis. Some of them 2, 3 days, three executive orders per day. We have seen the latest ones was one about the historically black colleges, and the other about the institutions that give accreditation. And the third one was about discipline in the schools, discipline in the public schools. And what's common among some of these things basically is they are digging of what Obama, Biden have introduced, and they are reversing all of them. one by one in this regard. So this thing would touch all aspects of the American lives in this regard. Where this thing is heading and trying to make sense and explain some of these things, inshallah, I'll talk about that, but I'm going to start with Haji Hassan talking about the economic impact, which really have affected international market and affected countries and affected companies and affected the way the trade will run, affected jobs, affected even the government employees by the thousands or tens of thousands being fired or asked to resign. So what are the economic impacts? What is it? Inshallah, we let the brother, inshallah, share the thoughts with you. Bismillah. Alaykum assalam.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. First of all, disclaimer, I am not economist. I'm not MBA. I'm not somebody who specializes in the economy. I think we have, next time, inshallah, we'll ask Brother Abrar to come and talk to us about trade wars. I did talk to him. He said, nobody wins a trade war. So he told me basically, there's no winners in this kind of thing. But I wanted to first of all start more broadly about the U.S. and its difficult position it finds itself in. So if you think about what were the colonialist powers and their basic bargain or interaction with the rest of the world, what it is that they take your raw materials, your cotton, your coal, your oil, they bring it into their country, and then they sell you finished goods. The raw materials are cheap, the finished goods are expensive. This is why all of the developing world, they have a lot of them have trade deficits. Why? Because they need to import their cars, their machinery. It's why then they have to put tariffs on those things to try to manage their trade deficit. For example, in Pakistan, what I'm familiar with, I can tell you that a car there, a same Toyota Corolla, is twice as much as it is in the US. So you find all small cars. And the person who has like a Mercedes is like he bought a Rolls Royce. This is how much it costs. It's similar, and that's all related to tariffs. And that's how the developing world had managed trade. They get some benefit from the raw materials, and they try to limit, how much the trade deficit on finished goods. But what happened to the US is it increasingly found itself drifting into a position of a developing country. China, which is the only important actor here, everything else is irrelevant. China currently makes 30% of the world's goods, 30%. And they were on track and on a trajectory to make 50% of the world's goods. That is the only fact of relevance. They're on a trajectory to make half of everything that the world produces. And so all they were becoming was like the old colonial power. They need other countries for their raw materials. And you saw them over the last few years. They were making trade deals with every country in the world for raw materials, because they need the raw materials so they can send you the finished goods. And so the United States found itself that this is the main competitor and the main threat to American dominance. Everything that America produces of high value, the Chinese have either already exceeded them or on the verge in a few years of matching, if not exceeding them in that field. And so it's not, we see Trump, he did, and I'll talk about what he did, but before Trump, this was already a source of concern for the US government. And I'll just tell you some of these things which happened during the Biden administration. October 2022, BIS, which is the Department of Commerce, has a special division called the Bureau of Industry and Security. and they are the ones who kind of manage trade for the US for areas where they feel like there's a national security interest. So they're very important in limiting semiconductors, other things. October 2022, this is Biden administration, interim rule, PRCs, the People's Republic of China, limiting their ability to purchase and manufacture certain high-end semiconductors for military administration. They said they need to slow China's development of advanced AI, and they need to impair China's development of indigenous semiconductor applications. So the US has a big lead in semiconductors, and that's one of the biggest leads that it has over China. But China increasingly is making their own semiconductors. Huawei is one of the main, and they just announced a breakthrough just this week. But they are still behind in that area. And so that's why they decided, let's try to put the brakes on them. October 2023, further tightens export controls on advanced chips to China. April 2024, Biden administration tripled rates on Chinese steel and aluminum imports. April 2024, what else happened? They banned TikTok, right? This was the Biden administration. At the same time, China responded by banning WhatsApp and Threads from their store. China implemented 43.5% anti-tariff on US propionic acid. This was April of 2024. This is an agricultural product. And I'll just tell you, this is just a list of all of the acts that the Congress passed in 2024 or considered against China. Countering the PRC Malign Influence Fund Authorization Act, Science and Technology Agreement Enhanced Congressional Notification Act, Removing Our Unsecure Technologies to Ensure Reliability and Security Act, Chinese Currency Accountability Act, Taiwan Conflict Deterrence Act, Foreign Adversary Communication Transparency Act, and there's really like 10 more of these things. So this is not something that has just started in the Trump administration against China. This is something which has scared the US establishment on a fundamental level. And really, there's no way they can actually prevent China from doing this. Their idea is like, let's delay it and see what we can do to compete. And in the background, China and Russia have been trying to come up with some other alternatives to US. For example, in the financial sector, trying to come up with an alternative to the SWIFT banking system. The SWIFT communication protocol, which is the protocol that all the banks use to communicate and transfer money between themselves. They were trying to come up with an alternative. At the same time, we have Bitcoin and some these currencies where some countries actually adopted Bitcoin as the national currency. Russia, when they were under sanction, all oil and gas before that time was the final trade had to be in dollars. You settled the account in dollars. Russia said, no, you settled the account in rubles. You buy our oil, you pay us in rubles. So how do you get a ruble? You have to buy a ruble in the open market, and then you give them the ruble in payment. And so that strengthens that currency. So increasingly you see there's what's called a de-dollarization of the world. So there's less and less support on the dollar. It just became in the initial stages. But already you can see the outlines of what is happening. And in fact, there's also this issue that are Europe and the US going to be aligned when it comes to China? And so that was the environment that we found ourselves in when Trump took office. And so, you know, I'll just say these are all Biden tariffs. Lithium ions, 25%, medical gloves, 25%, natural graphite, 25%, permanent magnets, 25%, syringes and needles, 20%, 50%. These are all tariffs that the Biden administration put on China before Trump took office. So it's not that they weren't already starting the tariff idea. But what Trump did, which was quite frankly shocking to the entire economic establishment in this country, was he put tariff on every single country in the world. I mean, he put 10% base tariff on every country in the world. He started putting tariffs on the closest trade partners that the US has and allies in this competition with China, the European Union, Canada, Mexico, Taiwan, Vietnam, Israel says. But these were countries which we had said, you set up your own independent industry, and we're going to make you an alternative to China. But even those countries got 25% tariffs, 30% tariffs. And so, even the people who supported this president, they said this was utter chaos, craziness. It didn't make any sense. It doesn't understand any strategic benefit. There's no goal. All it did was ultimately, across the board, the entire world, whether they were projected to have growth or not, suddenly all of them are projected to have recession or lower growth or minus growth. This is the definition of recession. Suddenly, you cause the entire world economies to have what they call economic flu, and you induced it. And for what purpose? And so still we don't know the purpose. The Trump advisor, which is Peter Navarro, he's a very big tariff proponent. And in fact, much of his research is, the other economists, they laugh at his conclusions because they use faulty math and is really thoroughly discredited. But, sometimes Trump listens to certain people and he really, kind of believes that there's some kind of benefit of tariff to the US. To other countries, you put a tariff on some kind of industry to protect your own industry until it becomes to a certain level and now it can compete, right? That's the purpose of a tariff on the short term. But that was so many years ago in the US. It's no longer that scenario that the US finds itself in. But somehow Trump is back still thinking like the old days. So this happened, it impacted the whole world. To the point that, as Brother Shem said, is that the stock market took a nosedive. It went down trillions and trillions of dollars. But ultimately what really happened, and this is what even Trump said, the reason why he changed his mind, is suddenly the bond yields for the American treasuries started going up. And so what happens with the treasury bill is that it's just like anybody's mortgage or car payment. It's on if your mortgage or car payment was on a variable interest rate, that's what you find the treasury. And that means that how we borrow from the rest of the world is based on that rate. Suddenly that rate went up, 4%, 4.8, 4.85, 4.9. Suddenly it became to the point that overnight every single person who was of any consideration, any value economically in the US is calling the White House. What are you doing? You're going to destroy the country itself. To the point that the president had to change his mind on tariffs. And he suddenly put a 90-day pause on all tariffs. And who knows what will happen. I mean, they said they're going to make 90 deals in 90 days. So far, no deal has come. So he had to do that. Secondly, he kept saying he's going to fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, to the point that suddenly the market is again tanking, and he has to again reverse his position and say, oh, no, I was never going to fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Sometimes I disagree. I want him to lower rates. He doesn't want to. That's his decision. Before that, he's talking about he's terrible, needs to go. And they're talking in the press about how the president has the right to fire the Federal Reserve chairman, even though in the law, it doesn't allow that, the president to do so. But the president has an overarching view, which the Supreme Court has supported him in many ways, is that the executive branch has the authority to fire anyone under the executive branch. And they consider the Federal Reserve to be under that authority. But nonetheless, he decided not to challenge that part of the economy, or that particular point in the law. So now we find ourselves in this situation, as Brother Shem mentioned, that we find the tariffs for most of the world were put on hold, other than China and Mexico, which are already placed, some European tariffs, which are already there, and the Chinese tariffs, which are enough to basically cut off all trade between China and the U.S. The Chinese have been watching what's happened with Russia. They've been preparing for this for a long time. They've thought of all the things they need to do strategically. They're not going to give in to any of these things. And Trump really misunderstood, at least on his part, what the Chinese were going to do, because he desperately wants them to come visit him and come up with a deal. But they're saying, you change your tariffs, and then we can talk. And so that's why he's saying things like, "Oh, we're talking to the Chinese," but in fact, they're not talking to the Chinese. They're embarrassed that the Chinese won't speak to them. So what does it mean for us economically? There was a recent evaluation by a think tank that looked at what would be the harm from the tariffs. And they said the average middle-income household faces a $22,000 lifetime loss. If you just did a tax, like a corporate tax increase from 21 to 36%, they said the losses will be twice as large compared to that increase in tax. They recently, they had this DOGE, which is this Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk. I think they said they saved 100 and something billion, 70 billion, and then there was an analysis, but it cost them 150 billion, in terms of you have to pay out all these people you fired, you pay them salaries, you pay them retirement benefits, you pay them everything so that 170 billion, it cost them 150 billion to just enact that change. So the economy itself is a victim of both a macro level concern for America and China, and then a mismanagement on an epic scale by the current administration. Everyone, like I said, even in the Biden administration, they were increasing certain tariffs, but they were structured, they were targeted, they were designed, they were specific, they were people were known about them in advance. These were things that were a normal administration would do, and they were designed for strategic goals. These are the goals that we're implementing. But this kind of action that this president did was, without all of those things. So it created chaos on a global level. So the U.S., unfortunately, fortunately, or however you want to look at it, is increasingly going to be a less significant player. But nobody can unwind this kind of financial interdependence in the world, which is the US dollar and treasury, overnight. It's going to take decades and decades of doing that. And already you see some countries are reducing their holdings of treasuries. The dollar has lost a lot of its value over the last few months, we anticipate that will continue to happen. Because what happened is just like in any relationship, when you lose trust, it's very hard to build it back up. And now what's happened is the entire world has lost trust with the US as being the safest place to invest your money, and a place which is sort of the bedrock of financial stability. No longer do they have that position. And that's kind of like maybe the legacy of Trump years from now will be that he destroyed trust in the American banking system, in the American treasuries, and American economic position. So I'll stop there, and inshallah, I'll give it to Brother Shem.
جزاكم الله خير وبارك الله فيك. If you allow me, inshallah, to add 2 points to this aspect. The tariffs issue, the president said it's the most beloved word to his heart. Tariffs, which happen to be an Arabic word, ta'rifa. Who's the advisor that is all over the president and the president is listening to in terms of those tariffs? It's somebody by the name of Peter Navarro. Now, Peter Navarro wrote a book, and he's referencing a specialist in the economy. Somebody who is, have a long, history in these things, and he have done studies and this and this and that. So what's the name of this person? His name is Oravan. Oravan. Now, two things. There's no such a person. There's no person with this name. And if you notice this name, it's the reverse of the name Navarro. So Navarro took his name and reversed the letters. So you get this new expert that he's referring to, Oravad. A person does not exist. This just shows you how serious are those issues. Because this person cannot back up his suggestion and his plans, and some of you know in this field more than us. You need to say, okay, those are the studies, those are the people who have done the work. So the main figure in all of this is a person that does not exist. The second point in this regard, before we go to the other aspect of the talk, is when the administration tell the American people, those who lost their jobs, go into manufacturing. Wait a minute. We are saying that we do not have manufacturing, and it will take 10 years to reestablish manufacturing. So from now till 10 years, what are we going to do? I mean, imagine the government have written a letter to the federal employees, 2.2 million, saying, resign, we'll give you money, what she alluded to, until September, don't do anything, or we're going to fire you anyway. So some took that offer. We know the IRS, they are saying about 2,300 took that offer. Department of Energy, about 4,000 plus or minus took that offer. And so on and so forth. Some of those people resigned, and many who did not resign, they fired them. Whole scale. And it was so embarrassing because they fired people who were responsible for the safety of the nuclear weapons in this country. They have to call them back. And this was not a typical, just isolated case. It happens all over. What it says is that they are giving the American people pretending that we have a plan. And obviously, there's no plan. Because you can see, okay, first of all, we need to buy Greenland, we need to have Panama Canal, we need to have Gaza, we need to have the Gulf of Mexico, Canada need to be the 51st state. What happened to all of these things? And then, in the other stage, we start seeing the tariffs one after the other, and then seeing that this thing is taking, trillions of money from people's wealth and retirement. They reverse part of it, so the stock market went back up. Then he picked up a fight with the Federal Reserve Chair, as was mentioned. And then we have this same behavior. So to come and say that, this is well planned, absolutely not. So let's go back to this issue. What is those people who are now being in charge and they want to change the landscape of this country and reestablish a new political establishment, what is it that they want? What is it that they are after? We need to go back to the fall of the Soviet Union. In the early 90s, when the Soviet Union disintegrated and many countries got their independence, including Ukraine, which later we know what had happened with that independence. The US came, this was during the Republican administration, they came with a white paper. talking about that we want the US to be the only superpower in the next 100 years. And there will not be a second or a third. So the next one to them will be way behind. There will not be any competition. So that was the plan. And of course, they were on their way. Some of it was described. I mean, they control the SWIFT system. Any country that they do not like, you are out of the SWIFT system. What does it mean? You cannot deal with a bank. You cannot transfer money through international monetary system. I mean, take Iran as an example. How do they buy stuff? They take those, 18-wheelers and they fill them with pure gold and they drive them to Istanbul, Turkey, and they give the money to the Turks and said, pay our debt to other countries. When the issue with Russia, somebody have a chair for the doctor? When the issue with Russia came, there was this threat of we're going to get Russia out of the SWIFT system. But then they realized they cannot do it because Europe need the natural oil, they need the oil and they need the natural gas of Russia. They cannot do without it. So Europe asked that, no, Russia need to be exempted from that. So the US said, okay, some banks will be exempted, but other banks would, and so on and so forth. We have seen, if anything happened around the world during the time of the people who will just go during the sea and try to take over ships, who can go and take care of it? The United States. Of course, there is a reason for this because the budget of the Defense Department is around $1 trillion. Imagine the Department of Defense budget is around $1 trillion. That's why they have the power in this regard. This is the this is the largest consumer-based country in the world. The American people buy everything. And every country wants to sell to this country. So yeah, some of these aspects plus others was really, we can be the superpower for the next 100 years and we will not have a second or a third. But the US made two major fatal mistakes. Two major fatal mistakes. They invaded Afghanistan and they invaded Iraq. And in the 20 years that they are being busy spending trillions of dollars, killing so many people, and many people from the US were killed, and some of them, 500,000, according to the Department of Defense, came crazy with mental illness from the soldiers. So while those 20 years were ongoing, China had built itself to be on its way to be the second economy, removing Japan from the scene and challenging the US. To the point that at one point the Chinese defense minister said, we want the US to be aware that Los Angeles is within, this is early on, before they have those advanced nuclear weapons in China, that Los Angeles is within, the range of our nuclear weapons. So in those 20 years, China was able to not still to get close, but they have made a big change. Some of what Trump is saying is true. China takes $300 billion a year from the US. Because the US does not have many things to sell. Yeah, they have Boeing, they have services, software, and so on and so forth. But what else do they have? Now they're saying we need to bring this manufacturing back. Wait a minute. A car being built today in the US has 30,000 pieces. Guess how many pieces are done and manufactured overseas? 15,000. So basically, they cannot. We have seen the Westinghouse building nuclear plants in the US. It was total failure. They ended up declaring bankruptcy. Westinghouse declaring bankruptcy and sold for $1. while they were able to build in China the same nuclear reactor in this regard. So China have gone a long way in this regard. So that theory of 100 years, no second power, is already evaporated. So China is taking its place. Russia. The US have tried over many years to try to get Ukraine to their side. And they have done so many things in this regard, spent tons of money in this regard. And in 2008, Putin told them, our patience have limit. They did not pay attention. 2014, he invaded the Crimea and took over Jazirat al-Qarm, the Crimea. And for the record, the Crimea was under Muslim rule for 300 years. Kiev was under Muslim rule. Moscow was under Muslim rule. I mean, it's really an amazing part of our own history that we do not know. But anyway, this is beside the point. So Russia, 2014, invaded Ukraine and took the Crimea, said this is part of Russia, and took other two areas. And now for the third year, they have invaded other parts of Ukraine, and we have seen a change in the approach of the American government toward Ukraine and Russia. You remember Biden sent about $400 billion. Alhamdulillah, $400 billion that were sent to Ukraine before and after the war. Trump came and says, no more weapons to Ukraine. I'm gonna solve the war in one day. He repeated this in so many instances that he's gonna solve the war between Ukraine and Russia. He's gonna end it in one day, 24 hours. I will do it in the first day, 24 hours, one day. In many instances, he has been in the office for 100 days, and the war is still ongoing. And now the government of the US saying, if the two sides are not gonna cooperate, we're gonna withdraw ourselves. So you can see, beside the tariffs, the fight with the Federal Reserve, the issue of Ukraine, and then he calls Netanyahu to the White House after the tariffs. Before the US declares the tariff, Netanyahu said, we will have 0 tariffs. But the US still imposed tariff on Israel. And when Trump told Netanyahu to come to the White House, he came running. And according to the Israeli press, they said, oh, the subject of discussion will be the tariffs. Israel will be the first one that will make a deal. And then in front of the whole world, to the journalist, he told Netanyahu, Erdogan is my friend. I like him and he like me. And from now on, any issue, dispute with Erdogan need to be solved. And I can play a role in this regard. Secondly, we're going to talk to Iran directly. And we are talking to Iran directly. And we're going to try to cut the deal with Iran directly. And this, of course, sent Netanyahu's brain spinning. Because those are two things that are very important for him and his image back home because of Syria, again with Turkey. So basically, Erdogan has the ears of Trump. Trump mentioned while he's sitting that I talked to Erdogan and I told him that he have done a marvelous job in Syria. He's a strong man, that you have done something that others cannot do, and so on and so forth. So there is this shift that we would see when it comes to international issues. And we can give more and more examples, but this is just a sample of the changes that are happening. Now, when it comes to China, really, Biden continue the policies of Trump the first term, because the restriction on China were put in the first Trump administration. I myself, as a nuclear engineer, I made 10 trips to China. When Trump came, no more trips to China. No more deals with China. And Biden continued that policy of what Dr. Hassan has mentioned. So, yeah, they have their eyes on China from that point. So that aspect, I agree, this is not something new, but it's now coming and manifest itself in this tariffs issue. So let's go back to the essence of this issue. You know, the white establishment in this country, there's no doubt that they did not like a colored president coming on 2 terms to be the president of the US. And then seeing a lady being promoted by the Democratic Party to be the president. And then seeing, you know, people of different lifestyle being running for the president. And then seeing the public schools, what the Biden administration did in this country and overseas on gender issues and transgender issues, from sports to schools. I mean, it just went out of order. And they were going 100 miles an hour. I mean, the society was in shock on the speed of the changes that were taking place in this culture. And that's why you could see that when the new administration came, there is a main feature of their policies reverse whatever the Democrats have done. You can see it even within the staff. They do not have the typical staff that every administration would have. People who are well experienced in the Department of Defense. People who are well experienced in trade. People who are well experienced in this and this and that. You can see some of those people have no clue. I mean, the head of the FBI and his deputy have no clue. They said this is the first time the deputy of the FBI is not a career FBI agent. I mean, imagine they sent a letter to the CIA agents saying, resign or we're going to fire you anyway. This was as part of what Dr. Hassan mentioned about this Dodge thing. I mean, can you imagine, you know, in an Arab country, they will tell the mukhabarat, dissolve yourself. They know they will be gone in 24 hours because we have police states, mukhabarat states. I mean, that's obvious. So for them to come and tell the CIA agents resign or we're going to fire you, and tell the FBI, you know, agents resign or you'll be fired. Part of this is getting back at the previous establishment. Because remember, for 4 years, the Department of Justice under Biden have followed Trump and put him in so many courts. He's getting back at them. He's taking the clearance, security clearance from top officials, including Biden himself, in this regard. But these actions are not an action of one person. When you have executive orders being done one after the other, sometimes, as I mentioned, 3 in one day, do you think the president reads all of them? Of course not. Do you think the president put these things together? Of course not. There is a new establishment being promoted. And one Republican senator said, we are all scared. Now, this is not the Democrats. It's not you and me. This is the GOP senator said, we are all scared. They cannot challenge him. Because if he goes after one of them, it's gone. That's why, who was the one who kept voting against his nominees? There was a Republican senator who kept voting against his nominees, with a few exceptions. Who was that senator? It was McConnell, who used to be the head of the Republicans. But before he did this, he said, I am retiring. This is my last term. Because he knows he has no chance. He kept saying, those people are not qualified. Those people will do a mess. And we have seen some of what he's talking about. I mean, the Department of Defense, the three close associates with the Secretary of Defense were fired. His chief of staff 2 days ago, some say he resigned, some say he was fired. So the top echelon who are advising the Secretary of Defense, who have no clue about defense, are no longer there. And they are saying there is chaos, a mess in the Department of Defense. And this should scare every American. Not just every American, I guess, every country. Because where this thing is heading. Where this thing is heading. So what we need to realize is some of those around the president, they do believe in this concept of the manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. What is manifest destiny? You need to remember those two words, manifest destiny. That Allah, the Creator, have chosen the United States of America to put His vision and the way things should be, not just in this country, but all over the world. And that's a trust that the US government need to carry. This was an old concept. But some of those around the president now are promoting this. I mean, make no mistake, what was done during the time, the Biden administration, as I said, it was taking the country way away from the norm that the people, there's a social norm. There's things that people have, expected. So it's possible to think that, we need to put the balance back. Let's put the balance back, but this thing is not that. Be sure that this thing is not that. It's really changing what they call the woke culture. I mean, they are threatening schools. They are threatening students with student loans, or those who even finished years back. They are threatening people who are federal employees. When they fired tens of thousands, they were making a point that those are recent people who got jobs because of the DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, which they are against because they think that this is aimed against the whites in this country. Now, where this thing is heading, and our time is running, where this thing is heading, it's really difficult to say. But some of the aspects that Dr. Hassan mentioned in terms of the economy, it will touch almost everyone. I mean, when you are getting tens of thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands of Mexicans out of the country, Indians out of the country, okay, who gonna pick up the blueberries and the strawberries? Is the people gonna go and you will get $2 for the blueberry or $3 for the blueberry? Are they gonna work for $8 an hour and $10 an hour? That's totally craziness. Where are the manufactured jobs that they are thinking that people go to? I was told in Sterling, which is close to Washington, D.C., not a single house was for sale. This is a very expensive area, Sterling. Not a single house was for sale. Within a few weeks of the administration, 200 houses on the block, ranging million, $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7 million a house. We know in this area, there are companies that work using money, so-called US aid, which is being distributed around countries to promote American agenda. And their jobs are threatened and finished. We know professors in universities told their graduate students we cannot support you. And the professors themselves are looking for jobs. I mean, that's a reality. Those stories are not just stories. What we need to realize that this is a dangerous situation. Why? Because somebody might come and say, well, we went through this. It was a difficult time. After September 11, this is totally different. September 11, you had the courts. And if your rights were violated, you can go to the courts and the courts will stand with you. At this point, they are challenging the courts. And in some cases, they are not listening to the courts. This country is built on 3 pillars. You have the executive branch, the legislative branch, the Congress, and you have the judiciary. So the court can at any time tell the government, you cannot do this. This is not according to the Constitution. Unless Congress make laws, you cannot do this. You cannot do this. Take the example of this so-called Maryland man, which is really, okay, so the media is calling this Maryland man. And this high official in the administration comes and says, any media person who called this man Maryland man, they have to apologize to the American people. And then the president come and talk about the Maryland man. The president talk about the Maryland man. He said, I did not know about it. I have nothing to do with it. So what's this Maryland man? Somebody who is here now legally, sent to Salvador. The Salvador has prisons that remind you of the prisons in Syria. During Assad. Basically, they say, if you enter this prison, you do not see the light, neither the light of the bulbs, the electricity, nor the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the sun. That's how bad is the prisons in Salvador. So this guy is sent to one of those prisons. And then the government comes and says, we sent him by mistake. This is public. We sent him by mistake, but we are not going to bring him back. We sent him by mistake, but we are not going to bring him back. And the court said, no, you need to bring him back. Said, no, we are not obliged to bring him back. This person is such and such and such and such. Suddenly stories being formed around this poor person and his family got to be escaped from their house because the government published the address of his wife and children. As I said, there is a fundamental change because now if the courts cannot stop the government from violating your rights and my rights, then does this remind you of something? Yeah, the bulk of us are immigrants, right? So we know this back home. Whatever decision is taken, they want it to be final. And they already complain about the courts and the power of the courts. So the main issue in here where this thing will be heading can be determined by this issue between the government, the executive branch, and the courts. Of course, the election is coming in a year and 8 months for the Congress. And, that could be daf'ullah al-nas ba'dahum ba'd. I mean, that could be something that change the equation and push the government to its senses. In a few minutes, what to do? As I said, the universities are saying if you are a student with a student visa, don't leave the country. If you have a green card, don't leave the country. If you get a letter from the government that you have an appointment to get your green card, go to a lawyer and listen to what the lawyer tells you. If you get a letter from the government saying your citizenship is ready, come and take the test, go to a lawyer, ask him, and see what he tells you. Be prepared in case they come to a company, because now they are going to the public schools. I mean, imagine they are going to an elementary school because there are some of the kids that their parents are here illegal. And many Hispanics are fearing from leaving their home. But I want to make a point, and I think it's very important. I know some people may think otherwise, but for me it's crystal clear. The Muslims in this country are not the target of this cultural war. The Muslims in this country are not the target of this cultural war. You might see some aspect that you think, oh, confusing. The target is the political establishment of the Democratic Party and the left. And you can see this clearly with the fight with Harvard University. The government is telling Harvard University, give us the names of the staff, the name of the students, the discipline of the students, how do you choose the students? I mean, basically, give us all the information. From this aspect, as I said, may Allah bring the khair and the good for this ummah, and who knows, maybe weakening the position of this country on the international level can be for the best of the world, because having one country that can determine the fate of the world, as you have seen already, is very, very dangerous. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring the khair and the good. Allah.